Hey, welcome to the Seamus Evans Show. Today, I have a very special guest, a doctor, actually. Dr. Alex Braczkowski, who studies lions, ecology, and African wildlife. Now, I've caught up with Alex a few times, and every time I chat with him, I'm just so fascinated about some of the studies and tours that he's done over in Africa. So, Alex, mate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Seamus. It's fantastic to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, so mate, you have a wealth of stories in the African wildlife.
I've got a couple. I've been very fortunate to do a lot of traveling over the last 12 years of my life, and so I've been very lucky to travel a lot around the world and to basically, just to do a lot of wildlife research, a lot of wildlife photography, filmmaking. So yeah, just very lucky.
So you're obviously from South Africa.
Yeah, I'm from South Africa. I'm from a small coastal town called Durban. It's on the east coast, and great weather, great surfing, very similar climate to here in Brisbane. So yeah. And
so that obviously is your home. So that is like your wildlife. That is your backyard, so to speak, right?
Yeah, it is, and we're about 3 hours north of my home. We have lions, leopards, hyenas, some amazing beaches, and some incredible wildlife. So very very lucky to live in that part of the world. Yeah.
Now I've lived all over Australia, and so many tourists always say that everything in Australia can kill you, which is right. But our animals are nowhere near as scary as lions, leopards, cheetahs, elephants. Even in terms of those deaths, they're pretty hardcore. As a child in South Africa, what's it like growing up with having these crazy alpha predators in your backyard? Like, what are the safety protocols there?
Yeah, so South Africa is an interesting place because, James, actually it's quite different to a lot of other Africa. So South Africa, to be very honest, it's, as you say, the dangerous, creepy crawlies, but in a controlled environment. So South Africa is broken up into hundreds, if not thousands, of small game reserves that are all fenced, which is very different to a lot of other places in Africa. So a lot of the work that I do currently in Uganda and some of the work that my colleagues do in Tanzania and Kenya, those are non-fenced systems. So that's where literally people live with elephants, with lions, coming into their backyard, smashing some goats. In South Africa, it's a bit different. So you basically kind of are entering, every time you go to one of these reserves, you're entering a mini Jurassic Park, if you will, in more controlled environments.
Wow. So I want to actually talk about the game reserves, because I worked on a wildlife show for a long time, and I really fell in love with wildlife and ecosystems, and I really got an understanding of how endangered so many animals across the world, and how much they're struggling. Their numbers and population are struggling. And obviously it is, I guess it's not very morally correct to go hunting for lions and elephants and giraffes and things. But I don't know if we get the full picture. My understanding is that that's a full industry there. And if we didn't have game hunting and poaching over there, we wouldn't have those cool animals like lions. We wouldn't have them, right? Is that the case?
Yeah, so that's a really good point, and it's a good pragmatic view of the situation. As you'd probably know better than most people, especially with your background in wildlife filmmaking and making TV shows, these things are not clear cut. And in an African context, unfortunately, the reality is this, there's a lot of people across the whole continent, in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda. I mean, we did a big study on this problem. Essentially, who are the people in Africa that are facing the biggest conflict with these animals? So an elephant coming into someone's backyard, and how economically exposed are they? And we found that, there are many places, overwhelmingly in Africa, in places like Uganda, Tanzania, Burundi, where people are literally living on $5 a day. An elephant comes in and wipes out an entire crop. That's literally their whole banking reserve, if you will. Their sort of per capita income of that entire family gets wiped out. So then the question is, all right, so how do we deal with this? And if it's not through safari tourism, what are some of the other vehicles of economics that can help us ensure coexistence? And trophy hunting is one of them. Trophy hunting is obviously a land use type. It's a land use activity that works in places, for example, where tourists don't want to go, where maybe birding safaris are not good, where you cannot see a chimpanzee. But there are these vast open wildernesses where there are lions, where there are elephants, where there are these antelope, and there are people that are willing to go there, get malaria, shoot an animal, not lead its extinction, but then take that thing back with them, and then obviously the local communities living alongside those wildlife get some of the spoils.
Because it's not necessarily just go for it, free game, but shoot everything. It's very controlled, right? Like the person who owns that property would say, okay, you want a lion? All right, well, you're going to get this lion because it's getting older, it's a little bit sick. You know, we actually need to move it on anyway. Is that right?
Are you sure that you are not a wildlife ecologist, actually?
I told you, man, I get obsessed with this stuff.
The reason that I say that is because actually, like, people have literally been waging sort of scientific wars over exactly what you've said. So this whole idea of only shooting older animals. So the whole thesis of my master's research at the University of Oxford was on this topic of, okay, well, how do we ensure that older animals are hunted for African leopards? And what actually happens with leopards and lions, we find that through statistical modeling, if you shoot animals that are sort of over 5 to 7 years of age, then largely the population is buffered against declines. If you shoot younger animals, then you're going to get declines. But if you target those older individuals that have already sired that one litter of cubs, you're largely in the green.
There's a lot in my keynote, I share how lions actually live. And the boss of that pride, right, the leader, his job is to fight off the young lions that come along and try and steal his pride. But one day he's old, and then the young lion who comes along beats him up. And the whole pride will reject this lion, and now he's sent off into the wilderness injured until he basically just dies. Like, that is a horrible way to go as a former king, you know?
Yeah,
so it's almost
sad.
like
it is sad. Yeah,
the bullet is more humane.
It's sad because I've always said that these big cats, they have these two very, I mean, look, life's hard generally. And I mean, I'll talk a little bit about Jacob, the three-legged lion that we've been following for nearly a decade, but there's two epochs of a lion or leopard's life that are particularly hard. It's when they're about 3 years old, 2.5, 3 years. And then it's this time you're talking about sort of like 8, 9, 10. And they resemble very similar stages where they don't have like a stable territory, where they're kind of hiding out, hoping that they don't get smashed by a big male. So yeah, it is sad, as you say, you know, like to get kicked out and kind of, yeah.
Yeah, like Simba, Lion King 2, Simba is in for a world of trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, I do really want to know about Jacob the lion because, I mean, you've mentioned him to me a few times and you're pretty well known for this, right? Like you had, this was a documentary that was on Nat Geo, is that right?
Yeah, so we've got one currently on Disney Plus called Tree Climbing Lions, and Jacob is a character in that broader story about this incredible population of lions that climbs trees. It's this kind of cultural behavior that is quite unique to a few populations around Africa. But Jacob just started off as an ordinary lion living in this one part of Western Uganda. But what's happened over the last 8 years of his life is he's gone through these incredible challenges and just beaten sort of unimaginable odds, to put it in the least, including losing his leg to poachers. So, a remarkable animal.
So what are some of the things that he was able to achieve with only 3 legs? Because I'd imagine a lion, as we just mentioned, its strongest survival of the fittest, and the strongest one will prevail. So now we've got a lion without a leg traveling the wilderness. How the hell is he lasting that long?
So maybe in 30 seconds, I can just give you a snapshot of what he's been through. So 2019, he gets caught in a snare. Back left leg. So a snare, for the viewers out there, is basically a wire trap that is set in the bush not necessarily for lions, but for targeting the things that lions eat: antelope, buffalo, things like that, bush pigs, warthogs. Jacob steps into one of these things because the trails that the poachers set these things on is the precise place where lions also walk to hunt. He gets saved by this amazing Ugandan German vet called Ludwig Schiefer. Pulls him out of that pulls him out of that snare. A year later, that same leg, can you believe it? In the Democratic Republic, he crosses an international border from Uganda to the Congo, then steps into a bear trap. They call them a wheel trap, but it's essentially, for everyone out there, it's a bear trap. It's one of these toothed, horrific, pressured devices. Loses the same leg. Somehow miraculously gets saved by Mustafa and Sabuga, some guys from the Wildlife Conservation Society, and then basically survives with his pride for quite a long period. Then his pride gets poisoned by poachers targeting lion body parts. Somehow he's not in the area, dodges that literal bullet. Then about 2 months after that, he gets gored by a buffalo. A brave Ugandan vet called Eric Nyal, who's currently the warden of the Queen Elizabeth National Park, stitches him up with literal fishing line from a fishing village. Then he disperses with 2 of his brothers 70 kilometers north to a part of the national park, loses his brother, and that's basically where we've been filming him and sort of watching him for the last 3 years, is kind of capturing this second epoch of his life, which has just been incredible.
And how is he surviving? Like in terms of eating and in terms of feeding and hunting with only 3 out of 4 legs, how is he actually able to do that?
So I work with a really good team of young Ugandan biologists. So there's Bosco Atukwatse, Oren Cornel, Johnson Mutsaredza, and these guys have been monitoring him very intensively along with our broader team for about 3 years. And what they're finding, we're actually going to write this up as a scientific paper, is it seems that he's completely changed his hunting behavior to work more like a leopard than a lion. So lions, typically you'll see them, they'll still sometimes put in a bit of a rush, maybe 40, 50 meters. They chase down a wildebeest or they might stalk, but there's still some running involved. What we're seeing with him is he is painfully stalking through these very thick thickets, hunting these giant, essentially bush pigs. They're called giant forest hogs and warthogs, and like almost walking on top of them before he catches them. So it's incredible how this injury has led to an evolution in how he behaves.
Yeah, that I was going to lead into that in terms of adaptation and evolution. Like, I guess there would have to be a whole many thousands of years of 3-legged lions to work out a completely different species of how they hunt, because their hunting, is that ingrained or is that learnt by previous lions that teach them? Is it a learnt thing or is it an ingrained thing, the way they hunt? Because he's had to change his style.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination. I mean, it's very good what you say there. So the culture. So again, like with these particular lions that we've been studying, there's a culture of the climbing of the trees, that the female, the matrilineal line is passing down from generation to generation. They're literally watching mom do this. They get up the tree. Same thing with hunting. A lot of the time, they'll learn with the moms and the aunts and the daughters, like, okay, we're going to be hunting buffalo, we're going to be hunting cobs. But I think what we're seeing with Jacob is like, shit, bro, I can't do this anymore. I just cannot physically put in a rush. I can't jump on a buffalo anymore. So I think it's kind of through this trial and error, slowly, and then being like, okay, well, I can do this, and I can. I think it's just repeated learning that they're doing this. I mean, we're seeing something very similar now with a leopard that my team is monitoring at this incredible cave in Uganda that's showing this learnt hunting behavior of bats. It comes every day and it catches bats. Just goes into the cave, grabs a bat, runs away, comes back 5 minutes later, grabs a bat. So, and again, that's just something that this guy's learned. He's like, okay, man, dude, there's literally like a McDonald's here. Why the hell should I catch a duiker? Like, I'll just literally do this. So, it's a lot of it is just things that these animals are kind of learning in nature.
A lot of times I will get into heated debates about zoos with friends and peers. And again, from my research and my background in this wildlife show, I actually think zoos are really incredible because the wildlife is a really harsh place. If Jacob was in a zoo, he wouldn't have the 3-leg and he wouldn't be able to do this, right? Obviously, there's arguments for both. But one of the questions I was thinking about as you were talking, do you think, this is a deep question, right? We're heading philosophically here.
Okay.
Animals, do they have consciousness of themselves, do you think? Like, for Jacob to be able to go, I can't do that. I can't behave like I've been previously behaving and how I've been taught. I'm different. I have to do something different. Would you say that falls into a consciousness, or that just falls into, I don't know, adaptation or an intelligence to a degree? Like, do you think like animals think and are conscious? I told you it was deep.
Yeah. I don't want to like try and overreach here, because I simply, I think it's important as scientists, we have to have this, what they call this epistemic humility, when you just don't know. And I think what you're referring to there might be some scientific evidence in the higher order primates, things like chimpanzees, gorillas. I think the self-awareness thing might be there. I don't know the literature around self-awareness of whether Jacob himself understands. My gut reaction would be, this is purely instinct that's learned. Like hunger is driving this. Like, holy crap, dude, like if I don't change my strategy, or it could even be luck. It could just be like he stumbles upon a giant forest hog. Dude, the only reason that we learned all of this with him is because, look, first of all, he is very much, to what you alluded to, living in some ways kind of the sadder life with his brother, where they don't have territorial stability or what they call tenure over a pride. So they are very nomadic. But the only reason we learned all of this stuff from him is actually because we used these thermal drones, because we were like, dude, we can't film these guys hunting at night because they're literally walking through like the thickest bush ever. So we had to adapt. We ourselves had to adapt, use these thermal drones. And only once we had a bird's eye view could we learn, holy shit, this is what this lion is doing. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer about
No, that's all right. Well, I don't think anyone really can, unless I remember hearing there are studies done with dolphins recognizing themselves in the mirror, and that's, I guess that's a form of consciousness. But in your studies in the ecology community here in Australia, we're very much told, don't ever intervene in wildlife. If it's happening in the wild, if it seems sad, like an animal's being attacked or whatever, don't ever intervene. But in today's modern society, where most habitats have been destroyed and almost every animal is endangered, what is the, I guess, unspoken law about intervening when you see an animal in need? When, hey, just let nature take its place, versus, dude, if we don't intervene, it's going to die. It's going to die out. Where does the scientific community stand on that, do you think?
I think that's a really excellent question, and maybe you should reconsider your career choice. Maybe you should just become an ecologist, dude, because you're asking all the right things. I think what I see in an Australian context, you see a lot of these rehabilitation centers. You see a lot of guys taking in kangaroos, wombats, bats. Fundamentally, look, I think amazing. Like, if something's been struck by a car, bloody hell, yeah, let's take it. If it's been an anthropogenic form of near mortality, my view is 100% we need to intervene. Like, that's, I think a lot of people might say, well, that's stupid. You got to think about it in the population level. I think where we don't have a lot of research with a lot of these rehabilitation centers, and I think this is like so critical, is, okay, so if we look at the sample size of those 100 wombats that come in, the 200 eastern grey kangaroos that come in, there's two fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves. When we eventually put that animal back into the wild, does it show what's called site fidelity? So does it show a kind of homing to where you put it back? Or is it immediately displaced and killed by a car by another kangaroo because of territorial fighting? And then the second and more fundamental question is, does that animal reproduce? Because if it reproduces, then all the investment that you've put into it, all the money or the care or everything, was 100% worth it, because you're seeing that it's now contributing genetically to the population. My only like scientific wariness to all of this is if that sample size of 200 wombats coming into the center show no sight fidelity, get killed by a car within 3 months of release, and don't reproduce, then I'd be like, holy shit, okay, the science is showing us that when we hurt these animals, they don't come back. And I don't think we have a lot of data generally in this space for big cats, for Australian wildlife. There's not a lot of post hoc monitoring of these critical ecological questions.
What about, are you familiar with Rottnest Island?
Yeah. Is that where they have the little
Quokkas.
quokkas or?
Yeah. So because they're not on the mainland, the quokkas are completely overrun. Their population is so high, they do not have any fear because they are unfamiliar with any predator. So they're not scared of anything. And their numbers are obviously completely out of whack with how they kind of, I guess, should be in the wild. In your researches, in your studies, what is the downside of having too many of a population of an animal? Like, just say the Serengeti was overrun with giraffes.
Yeah.
Very few lions, just way too many giraffes, just like Rottnest Island of quokkas. What is there a downside, or does there have to be human intervention in monitoring numbers, or how important is that equality percentage?
Well, again, it comes down fundamentally also to the value systems of whoever is managing the wildlife department, external, governing boards, like, for instance, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. This is a really fundamental question, and I'll give you an analogy with like African elephants. So the African elephants in Botswana, Zimbabwe, South Africa, they don't know what to do with them. They are asking the precise question that you asked about the quokkas. What do we do with so many elephants? And what they are actually saying is, we want to sell the ivory of these elephants, these stockpiles that we have. We want to utilize this because we have a lot of elephants. But external pressures from, for instance, CITES and from the Europeans are saying, no, you shouldn't use this. And obviously also other African states that don't have a lot of elephants are saying, don't do this. So this is something that's constantly been debated in multiple sort of wildlife circles. Obviously, the biggest cause of overpopulation can be that the habitat suffers and then other animals suffer. So essentially, what can happen is you can have literal change of vegetation. That's happened with African elephants, where we see things like birds that actually nest in the cavities of trees that the elephants knock over, has impacts for those specific birds. So the sort of the impacts can be pretty negative. And again, I guess the question as managers is, what do we do about that?
Yeah. And then that's that human intervention of like, if the numbers went too high naturally, why should we intervene? I guess adaptation is a really huge element to animal survival, as you're witnessing with Jacob. I want to go back to when you were talking about the leopard in the cave with the bats treating it like a McDonald's. Obviously, animals are opportunistic. But in that discovery, you've actually discovered something really impressive that isn't usually witnessed on camera, right? What have you discovered?
Well, let me be very frank. So I didn't discover this. I was just the guy that realized what the kid with the camera discovered. So the guy who made the discovery is a guy called Bosco Atukwatse, and he is a 25-year-old Ugandan lion biologist, / big cat / just general ecologist. He's working on our project. He's the field coordinator, and it was actually his ecological gut hunch to set camera traps. He was trying to find leopards, and he heard about this cave, and it was Bosco that decided, hey man, I gotta, I want to try and see if there's maybe a leopard hanging out at this cave. And what Bosco unraveled was this, for the first time in nature, that we think is at scale a first kind of viral interface where these bats that live in the cave, they're called Egyptian fruit bats, so Rhoseticus aegypticus. they live in this cave, but they are also a harbor of a very deadly virus called Marburg. That's an ugly little sister of Ebola. And then he found about 14 different predator species going in there and feasting on these bats. And then he also found a bunch of tourists visiting the cave mouth with no PPE. So for 30 years, virologists, spillover ecologists, ivory tower academics, I like to call them, have been making these pretty little diagrams around, what these dynamics look like. But this kid, Bosco, with a 4K trail camera, finds this visually nearly 300 times, 300 videos of these different animals going in, and actually identifies probably the first sort of viral interface blueprint on camera. It's incredible.
So what does that mean? I remember catching up with you and you were talking about, when a virus spreads around the world, i.e. Ebola, COVID, we always try and backtrack how it started. But is my understanding that capturing this on film is basically seeing the seeds of a virus spread?
So what you're seeing, what Bosco essentially found, is the potential laboratory, if you will. The analogy that I make is, do you remember that movie Stargate? Not the TV series, the actual movie Stargate. So it's an old movie in 1994 with a guy called Kurt Russell. But it's an incredible movie because it's this. It starts off, they're in Egypt, and this archaeologist and a bunch of Egyptian excavators find this steel. It's not even steel. It's like some kind of alloy, like portal gate that they unearthed from the middle of the Egyptian sands. And I say that what Bosco's found is almost like this Stargate or this Rosetta Stone. We don't quite know what it is, but visually we can see, holy crap, there could be 14 pathways of how this virus jumps from, okay, I'm eating this thing. Do I have seropositivity in me by eating this thing? Am I getting infected? And if I'm not getting infected, that's as important as me getting infected. So why am I not getting? But what he's found is essentially a classroom for which I'm sure he's opened up now the floodgates of 1 million grants and 1 million scientists parachuting in here to essentially study, okay, how does this thing move? How does it not move? But for the first time at scale and at repetition, we have structured data that's coming out of how potentially these viruses move.
Wow. That's really impressive. And I guess throughout your whole career, you would have seen so many little discoveries like that. So this documentary, so is there a documentary that you've done out on Disney? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, it's called Tree Climbing Lions. It's something I did about 7 years ago. Yeah, it's basically it tracks the cultural behavior of these lions in a place called Queen Elizabeth National Park, and then obviously also shows some of the science that we've been doing, trying to figure out essentially how to count lions in this national park as accurately as we can.
And we've got to wrap things up. So I want to know, out of all of your study, what is your favorite animal? Doesn't have to be African, like ever in the world. Yeah. What would you say is your favorite?
Yeah, it's probably the African leopard. Or
Why?
just the leopard generally. Just because of how insane they are, and in terms of how adaptable they are, and what they can physically do, and in terms of how much sort of human abuse they can take. I mean, to give you an idea, there's literally data, satellite collar data from a leopard that moved across some of the most urban, dense, human populated areas in India, in Maharashtra, literally staked out a warehouse, slept in a warehouse before it found new habitat to spread in. So leopards are definitely kind of that embodiment for me.
And obviously the age-old question of what would you say is the number one apex predator? Does it fall under lion, crocodile, or polar bear? Like, what do you say is at the very top of the food chain? Not humans. You can't use that one.
Yeah, man, that's a good question. Wow. Man, you know what? I'd lean to kind of something like probably just intimidation, probably than like a Nile crocodile or saltwater crocodile, just because they're so goddamn just scary, and the fact that they kind of inhabit both land and water, and when you're in the water, you're really in their world. And then probably also just the leopard, just to, again, that adaptability, and that ability to live alongside people like tigers and lions can't. They can't handle that kind of abuse.
Really? Where do you, and last one, because it just popped in my head, but in terms of taming these animals, like when we watch Tiger King or when we see Dreamworld playing with the tigers, and over in, Abu Dhabi when they've got pet lions, how close are they to being ripped open any second? Like, are these animals tameable, or have they just worked out a way to not make them hungry?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and unfortunately, there's just multiple examples out there where, even the most seemingly expert trained humans on exactly this behavior, how to tame these animals, there just always seem to be really bad events where even those professionals, get abused, and get cut open. And so a really good example recently is a guy called John Varty. So he done a lot of this kind of work with tigers, lions, and he nearly died, got attacked by one of his most favorite tigresses. He was literally on an operating theater for 6 hours because of how she mauled him.
When I look at that stuff and I see those attacks, I always think, well, what do you think was going to happen? Like, what do you think the end result here is?
Yeah. And look, man, the fundamental thing also, I think this is a kind of a nice thing to kind of maybe end off on is, whenever you see people and tigers or lions or big cats interacting and like living together or supposedly like in the wild together, fundamentally when big cats have that human imprinting, you are damning that animal for life. Because what is it's associating you with food. And we have an overwhelming plethora of literature that shows that when we release these big cats with human imprinting into the wild, they almost always kill livestock. And if they don't kill livestock, they kill people.
Wow. So that really goes back to leaving them.
Yeah, or at least minimizing the imprints if you have to raise leopards or raise tigers,
And then once you kind of imprint them, they have to stay removed.
Yeah.
And enclosed to a degree.
Pretty much.
Well, mate, really great way to wrap up. Lastly, where can people go if they're listening to this to follow more about you and also what you're up to and what the latest research and data that you're working on?
Yeah. So I'm just Alex Braczkowski. That's my Instagram handle. I've got a website, alexanderbraczkowski.com, that you can find all my research and my team's research. The Chambura Lion Project, if you just type that in, you'll see our organization. We're small, we're grassroots, but we're punchy. That's basically it.
Mate, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, because even in this little short term, I've just learned so much about wildlife and how important it is to keep monitoring and really monitor our interaction with wildlife and keeping that line separate, really.